Picture a German general standing in his command post in August 1944, looking at reconnaissance reports with complete confusion on his face. His intelligence officers are telling him something impossible. The Americans, who just broke out of Normandy weeks ago, are now 300 miles away and still advancing. Their tanks haven't run out of fuel. Their artillery hasn't run out of shells. Their soldiers are still eating hot meals. He throws the reports down and says this can't be right. Check again. But it is right. And the reason why is rolling down French roads at this very moment. Thousands of trucks, driven mostly by Black American soldiers, were operating around the clock in the largest trucking operation in military history. This is the Red Ball Express, and it's about to teach the German army a lesson about logistics that will cost them the war. This is the story of how the most unglamorous part of warfare became the deadliest weapon the Allies had. Let's start by understanding what German generals thought about American logistics. The German military had a reputation for efficiency and organization. Their logistics system, while not perfect, had carried them through campaigns across Europe. They'd conquered Poland in weeks, France in months, and driven deep into the Soviet Union. They knew logistics. They understood supply chains. And when they looked at American planning, they laughed. Here's what they saw. The Americans were planning to land on beaches in Normandy, fight inland, and then supply massive armies pushing across France toward Germany. The distances involved were enormous. The amount of supplies needed was staggering, and the Americans were planning to do this without capturing a major port immediately. The German generals did the math and concluded it was impossible. The Americans would get maybe 50 or 100 miles inland before their supply lines collapsed, and they'd be forced to stop. This wasn't just wishful thinking. This was based on real historical precedent. Every major army in history had faced logistics problems. Napoleon's invasion of Russia failed partly because of logistics. Germany's own invasion of the Soviet Union was constantly hampered by supply issues. Moving millions of tons of supplies hundreds of miles while fighting a war was incredibly difficult. The Germans assumed the Americans, with their supposedly soft and inexperienced army, would struggle with this even more than experienced powers had. There was also an element of racism and cultural contempt in German thinking. Nazi ideology portrayed Americans as mongrels, a mixed-race society that was inherently inferior to pure Germans. They looked at America's diverse population and saw weakness rather than strength. They especially dismissed the capabilities of Black Americans, who they assumed were primitive and incapable of complex tasks. This racist blindness would prove catastrophically wrong. But let's back up and talk about what actually happened on D-Day and immediately after. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy. It's the largest amphibious invasion in history, and it succeeds, though not without heavy casualties. The Allies establish beachheads and start pushing inland. But there's a problem. The Germans are defending aggressively, and the terrain in Normandy is terrible for attackers. We're talking about hedgerow country, where every field is surrounded by thick earthen banks topped with bushes and trees. It's a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. For weeks, the advance is slow and grinding. Allied forces take heavy casualties fighting for every mile. The Germans start to think maybe their assessment was right. Maybe the Americans and British can't do this. Maybe the invasion will stall out. But they're focused on the wrong thing. Yes, the advance is slow, but the buildup is incredible. Every day, more supplies are landing on the beaches. More troops, more equipment, more ammunition, more fuel, more food. The Allied logistics machine is working at a scale the Germans don't fully comprehend. By late July, the Allies had built up enough force for a breakout. Operation Cobra launches on July 25th. American forces punch through German lines, and suddenly, everything changes. The slow grinding advance turns into a race. American armor is rolling across France at speeds that shock everyone, including the Allies themselves. Towns that the Germans expected to hold for weeks fell in days or hours. The entire German defensive structure in France starts collapsing. Now here's where it gets interesting. When you're advancing that fast, logistics becomes everything. A tank without fuel is just a very expensive piece of junk. A soldier without ammunition can't fight. An army without food can't function. The Germans know this. They're expecting American supply lines to snap at any moment. They're planning counterattacks designed to hit when the Americans run out of gas and have to stop. But the Americans don't stop. They keep coming. And the reason is rolling down the roads behind them. The Red Ball Express officially began operations on August 25, 1944. It gets its name from railroad terminology, where Red Ball trains were express trains that had priority over all other traffic. The concept is simple, but the execution is unprecedented. Take thousands of trucks and organize them into a dedicated supply route from the Normandy beaches to the advancing front lines. These trucks run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, carrying ammunition, fuel, food, and everything the Army needs. No civilian traffic allowed. No other military traffic allowed. Just supply trucks, moving as fast as they can. The numbers are staggering. At its peak, the Red Ball Express was operating over 5,000 vehicles. These trucks are carrying between 12,000 and 13,000 tons of supplies every single day. That's over 300,000 tons per month. To put that in perspective, that's enough supplies to keep multiple armies advancing hundreds of miles while fighting constantly. It's a logistics operation on a scale that's never been attempted before. And here's the thing that really matters. About 75% of the drivers in the Red Ball Express are Black American soldiers. This is important for several reasons. First, it shows the crucial role that Black Americans played in winning the war, a role that's often overlooked or downplayed in popular history. Second, it completely contradicts the racist assumptions that German generals and Nazi ideology had about Black people. And third, these men are doing one of the most dangerous and demanding jobs in the entire Army. Let me explain why driving for the Red Ball Express is so tough. These guys are driving 2.5-ton trucks, fully loaded, which means they're actually carrying 5 or 6 tons when you include the cargo. They're driving on roads that are often damaged by combat. They're driving in blackout conditions at night, which means no headlights, navigating by feel and memory. They're under constant pressure to maintain speed because the armies at the front need those supplies now, not tomorrow. And they're exhausted because the schedule is relentless. A typical Red Ball Express driver is working 16 to 20 hours straight. He drives from the beaches in Normandy to the front lines, wherever those happen to be that day, delivers his cargo, turns around, and drives back. Then he does it again and again. Day after day after day. There are accounts of drivers falling asleep at the wheel and crashing. There are stories of men so tired they can barely stand, but they get back in the truck because their brothers at the front need supplies. The maintenance situation is equally impressive and equally challenging. These trucks are being driven hard, really hard. They're breaking down constantly. Engines overheat. Tires blow out. Transmissions fail. The maintenance crews are working miracles, keeping the fleet operational. They're working alongside the roads, in the dark, fixing trucks as fast as they can so they can get back on the route. If a truck can't be fixed quickly, they unload the cargo onto another truck and keep moving. Nothing stops the Red Ball Express. Now let's talk about what this looks like from the German perspective. German reconnaissance units and intelligence officers are watching this truck convoy rolling through France, and they can't believe what they're seeing. There are thousands of trucks, stretching for miles. They're moving constantly. The Germans attack them when they can. They strafe the columns with aircraft. They set up ambushes. But it doesn't matter. The trucks keep coming. For every truck the Germans destroy, 10 more roll past. German generals start getting reports from the front lines that are increasingly panicked. Their units are running out of ammunition and fuel, but the Americans seem to have unlimited supplies. German tanks are being abandoned because there's no fuel to run them. German artillery is rationing shells. German soldiers are going hungry. Meanwhile, American units are advancing with full tanks, plenty of ammunition, and hot food. The logistics disparity is becoming a combat multiplier that makes it impossible for Germany to mount effective resistance. There's a specific incident that really drives this home. In late August 1944, the German army was retreating across France, trying to establish defensive positions along the German border. They're moving as fast as they can, but they're constantly harassed by Allied forces. A German general named Gunther Blumentritt later wrote about this period. He describes ordering counterattacks that fail because his units don't have the fuel to maneuver or the ammunition to sustain combat. Meanwhile, American forces are everywhere, seemingly unlimited in their ability to keep fighting. Blumentritt writes about a moment when it really hits him. He's looking at maps showing American advances, and he realizes they're moving faster than German forces moved during the invasion of France in 1940. But the Germans in 1940 had short supply lines and were advancing through a country whose infrastructure was intact. The Americans in 1944 are advancing through a war zone, with supply lines stretching hundreds of miles back to beaches in Normandy, and they're still maintaining the advance. How is this possible? The answer is the Red Ball Express, but Blumentritt doesn't know that yet. He just knows something is very wrong with German assumptions about American capabilities. Let's get into the specifics of how the Red Ball Express actually works, because the organization is fascinating. The route is clearly marked with red balls on signs, so drivers know they're on the right road. There are checkpoints and control stations every few miles. These stations monitor traffic, provide directions, handle breakdowns, and make sure the flow keeps moving. There are rest stops where drivers can grab food and maybe catch a few hours of sleep, though most don't get nearly enough rest. The trucks move in convoys for safety and efficiency. A convoy might have dozens of trucks traveling together. They maintain tight spacing to maximize road usage. If you're a civilian in France in late 1944 and you see a Red Ball Express convoy coming, you get out of the way. These trucks have absolute priority. Military police are stationed along the route to enforce this. Everything else stops to let the Red Ball through. The cargo varies depending on what the front needs most. Some trucks carry ammunition, 5-ton loads of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, grenades, everything an army fires in combat. Other trucks carry fuel in large jerry cans. Some carry food, medical supplies, spare parts for vehicles, literally anything the army needs. The Red Ball Express doesn't specialize. It moves everything. Loading and unloading is organized chaos. At the Normandy beaches, supplies are coming off ships constantly. Stevedores and cargo handlers are working around the clock. They load trucks as fast as they're available. The trucks then hit the road. At the front, unloading is equally frantic. Combat units need supplies immediately. There's no time for careful inventory. Trucks arrive, get unloaded, and head back. The turnaround time is minimized as much as possible. Now here's something that often gets overlooked. The Red Ball Express doesn't just support American forces. The supplies they're moving are going to all Allied units pushing across France. British forces, Canadian forces, Free French forces, Polish units. Everyone benefits from this logistics network. The Red Ball Express is making the entire Allied advance possible. The human cost is significant. Truck accidents kill and injure drivers. German attacks on the convoys cause casualties. The sheer exhaustion leads to illness and breakdown. These men are heroes in the truest sense, doing incredibly difficult and dangerous work that gets none of the glory of combat, but is essential to victory. And they're doing it while facing discrimination and segregation in their own army. Let's talk about that because it's important. The United States Army in World War II was segregated. Black soldiers serve in separate units, often commanded by white officers. They face racism and discrimination constantly. Many black soldiers are assigned to service and supply roles because the Army doesn't believe they can handle combat, which is both racist and historically false, as black combat units prove repeatedly. The Red Ball Express is predominantly black because the Army assigned black units to this duty, not expecting it to be crucial to the war effort. But the Red Ball Express becomes one of the most important operations of the entire campaign. These black soldiers are the reason American forces can maintain their advance. They're the reason the Germans can't establish defensive lines. They're the reason the Allies liberated France in months rather than years. And they do it while dealing with racism from their own military. That makes their achievement even more remarkable. There are individual stories that really highlight what these men accomplished. One driver, named William H. Williams, later recalled driving for 36 hours straight because the supplies were desperately needed at the front. He said he hallucinated from exhaustion, seeing things that weren't there, but he kept driving because he knew soldiers were counting on those supplies. Another driver, Charles Stevenson, described being strafed by a German plane and watching the truck next to him explode, but then continuing the mission because that's what you do. The maintenance crews deserve special recognition, too. These guys are keeping thousands of trucks operational under terrible conditions. They're working on the side of roads, often under fire or threat of air attack. They're improvising repairs with whatever materials they have. They're cannibalizing parts from destroyed trucks to keep others running. The official maintenance standards go out the window. If a truck can move and carry cargo, it's good enough. Get it back on the road. By September 1944, the Red Ball Express had moved over 400,000 tons of supplies. The Allied advance has liberated most of France. American forces are approaching the German border, and the German military is in complete disarray. They've lost hundreds of thousands of men, most of their equipment in France, and any hope of stopping the Allied advance through conventional means. The logistics system that German generals mocked has crushed them. But then something interesting happens. The Red Ball Express shuts down. Not because it failed, because it succeeded. By mid-September, the Allies had captured the port of Antwerp. With a major port operational, supplies can be delivered much closer to the front lines. The need for long-distance trucking decreases. The Red Ball Express runs for 83 days total, and in that time, it completely changes the course of the war in Western Europe. Let's talk about the broader implications of what the Red Ball Express represents. This is American industrial and organizational power at its peak. Think about what had to happen to make this operation work. America had to manufacture thousands of trucks. They had to ship those trucks across the Atlantic. They had to organize tens of thousands of drivers, mechanics, and support personnel. They had to establish maintenance facilities, fuel depots, and supply dumps. They had to create the entire logistics infrastructure from scratch in a war zone. And they did it. Not only did they do it, they did it so well that it became the model for military logistics for decades afterward. The lessons learned from the Red Ball Express influenced how the United States military thinks about supply chains to this day. Modern military logistics, with its emphasis on speed, efficiency, and overwhelming capacity, comes directly from the Red Ball Express experience. The German military, in contrast, was still using horses for much of their logistics. This sounds crazy, but it's true. The Wehrmacht used over 2 million horses during World War II. Their supply system relied heavily on railroads and horse-drawn wagons. This worked okay when they were advancing and could capture enemy rail networks. But when they were retreating and Allied air power was destroying railroads, the German logistics system collapsed. They simply couldn't move supplies fast enough or in large enough quantities to sustain their armies. The strategic implications are enormous. Germany lost World War II for many reasons, but logistics is near the top of the list. They couldn't supply their armies adequately. They couldn't replace losses fast enough. They couldn't maintain the equipment they had. Meanwhile, the Allies, and especially the Americans, had logistics systems that were almost miraculous in their effectiveness. The Red Ball Express is the perfect symbol of this disparity. There's a deeper lesson here about warfare in general. Wars aren't won just by brave soldiers and good tactics. They're won by supply chains. They're won by the ability to keep armies fed, armed, and equipped. They're won by trucks and fuel and ammunition and food. The Red Ball Express didn't fire a shot at the enemy, but it was one of the most effective weapons the Allies had. Every ton of supplies delivered was a ton of combat power at the front. Think about what this means for understanding history. When we tell stories about World War II, we focus on battles and generals and heroic actions. D-Day gets movies and books. The Battle of the Bulge is famous. Individual heroes get recognized. But the Red Ball Express? Most people have never heard of it. The thousands of men who drove those trucks are forgotten. That's wrong. Those men were as essential to victory as any infantry soldier or tank commander. They deserve recognition and respect. It also tells us something about the nature of military power. Germany had excellent soldiers, good equipment, and experienced commanders. What they didn't have was the industrial and economic capacity to sustain a long war against opponents who did. The United States could produce trucks and fuel and ammunition at rates Germany couldn't match. That matters more than tactical brilliance when the war goes on long enough. Germany was fighting a war it couldn't win because it couldn't sustain its military effort. America could. The Red Ball Express is proof of that. After the war, many of the men who served in the Red Ball Express came home to an America that was still segregated, still racist. They'd served their country heroically, accomplished incredible things, helped win the war, and they still couldn't eat at the same restaurants as white people. They still faced discrimination in employment, housing, and education. That's a shameful reality that we need to acknowledge. These men deserved better from the country they served. But their accomplishment remains. The Red Ball Express worked. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept the Allied armies supplied during one of the most important advances of the war. It proved that American logistics could operate at a scale and efficiency that nobody thought possible. It taught German generals a painful lesson about underestimating American capabilities. And it showed that Black Americans could accomplish anything when given the opportunity and resources. In terms of scale, the numbers are almost hard to comprehend. Over 83 days, the Red Ball Express moved 412,000 tons of supplies. That's using about 6,000 trucks and over 23,000 personnel. They drove hundreds of millions of miles in total. They kept entire armies moving and fighting. This is logistics as a combat multiplier in its purest form. Compare this to what Germany could do. By late 1944, German supply trucks were being abandoned for lack of fuel. German units were going into combat with partial loads of ammunition. German soldiers were often hungry because food supplies weren't getting through. The Wehrmacht was slowly dying because it couldn't feed itself. Meanwhile, American forces had so many supplies that they sometimes had to be told to slow down their advancement because the planners couldn't keep up with their speed. There's a quote from General Dwight Eisenhower that's relevant here. He said that amateurs talk strategy, but professionals talk logistics. The Red Ball Express is what he was talking about. All the strategic brilliance in the world doesn't matter if your soldiers don't have bullets and your tanks don't have fuel. The Red Ball Express ensured that Allied forces always had what they needed. That's why the advance across France succeeded. The technological aspect is worth noting, too. The trucks used in the Red Ball Express were primarily GMC 2.5-ton trucks, nicknamed Deuce and a Halves. These were workhorses, reliable and tough. American industry produced over 500,000 of them during the war. They weren't fancy or high-tech, but they were exactly what was needed. Simple, durable, maintainable, and able to carry heavy loads over rough terrain. That's good engineering. That's practical design focused on solving real problems. The Germans had trucks too, but not enough of them, and not with the same level of standardization. The Wehrmacht used trucks from dozens of different manufacturers, many of them captured from conquered countries. This created maintenance nightmares because parts weren't interchangeable. A mechanic might need 20 different types of spark plugs to service all the different trucks in a unit. The Americans, by standardizing on a few truck models, made maintenance much simpler. That's the kind of unglamorous but crucial decision that wins wars. Let's talk about one more aspect of this story: the cultural and social impact of the Red Ball Express. Black soldiers serving in it were proving through their actions that racist assumptions about their capabilities were false. They were operating complex vehicles. They were making decisions under pressure. They were displaying courage and competence constantly. This didn't end racism in America, not by a long shot, but it was part of the larger process that eventually led to the civil rights movement. Many of the men who served in the Red Ball Express came home and became activists for equality. They'd served their country, they'd proven themselves, and they weren't going to accept second-class citizenship anymore. The war experience, including service in units like the Red Ball Express, radicalized a generation of Black Americans who demanded the rights and respect they'd earned. The connection between World War II service and the later civil rights movement is direct and important. From a purely military history perspective, the Red Ball Express represents the culmination of lessons learned over decades. The importance of logistics wasn't new. Military theorists had understood it for centuries. But actually implementing logistics at this scale, with this efficiency, in a war zone, that was unprecedented. It required not just good planning, but incredible execution by thousands of people doing their jobs under terrible conditions. The legacy continues. Modern military operations still depend on logistics. The United States military remains the best in the world at projecting power over long distances, and this capability stems from its logistics. The ability to move supplies, maintain equipment, and keep forces supplied in remote locations all trace back to lessons learned in operations like the Red Ball Express. It's not glamorous, but it's what makes American military power possible. So what do we take away from this story? First, never underestimate the importance of logistics. In any endeavor, the boring support work is often more important than the flashy frontline stuff. The Red Ball Express wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Second, recognize that different forms of contribution matter. Combat soldiers get the glory, but drivers and mechanics and supply personnel are just as crucial to success. Third, understand that underestimating your opponent, especially based on racist or cultural assumptions, is a fast way to lose. The German generals who scoffed at American logistics learned a painful lesson. They assumed Americans were soft and incapable of organizing complex operations. They were catastrophically wrong. The Red Ball Express crushed German hopes of stopping the Allied advance. It proved that American organizational and industrial capability was the real superweapon of World War II. Not the atomic bomb, not the P-51 Mustang, not the M1 Garand. The real superweapon was the ability to supply and sustain armies across thousands of miles of ocean and hundreds of miles of war-torn countryside. That's what won the war. And at the heart of that capability were thousands of men, mostly Black Americans, driving trucks day and night through exhaustion and danger. They didn't ask for recognition. They just did their jobs. They kept the supplies moving. They kept the armies fighting. They won the war one truckload at a time. That's heroism in its purest form. That's service that deserves to be remembered and honored. The Red Ball Express was proof that logistics wins wars and that American soldiers, regardless of race, were more than capable of accomplishing incredible things when given the chance. If this story opened your eyes to an unsung chapter of World War II, if it made you think differently about what really wins wars, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're bringing you the stories that textbooks skip, the heroes who don't get movies made about them, the unglamorous truth about how wars are actually won. Don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. And remember, the most important victories are often won by the people nobody's watching.